Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today visiting B&T in Thun, Switzerland. And today we are taking a look at another one of B&T's 9mm carbines. This one is the KH-9, and that actually stands for something very specific. It is Karl's Hobby 9mm. And the Karl in question is Karl Brügger, the owner and founder of B&T. Now, the backstory on this is, well, Karl Brügger is very much a recreational and competitive shooter, and particularly likes 9mm pistol caliber carbines. And he got his hands on a Sights Spectre. That's if you're not familiar with it, I actually have a couple of videos on the history and on the shooting of a Sights Spectre. It's an Italian stamped sheet metal semi-auto carbine slash submachine gun, available in both configurations. Notable for having this quad stack 30 and 50 round magazines, and for having a really weird fire control group that actually has like a double action mechanism in a carbine and a decocker. It's weird. Now, Karl Brügger got his hands on a couple of these and thought, wow, that's different, it's cool, it's neat. Hey, and they're out of production, but you know what? I own a company that makes guns. Let's build the Sights Spectre. And went and tried to buy the tooling and essentially purchase the remains of the project from its owners in Italy. And could not, because it turns out when the company finally folded, they just scrapped all of the tooling, and there wasn't anything left for Karl Brügger to buy. But he wasn't going to let that stop him. Instead, he decided, screw it, we'll build our own. And that was the KH-9, which I think the engineering department named, probably while rolling their eyes at the idea that, oh, here we are, a real company with serious business to do, but we're going to make this goofy double action trigger mechanism carbine because the president of the company thinks it'd be fun. That's actually a significant element of B&T's product line, which is hilarious because a lot of those products have turned into very popular, very successful products. Anyway, this is all taking place in 2015, and they basically went ahead and just built it, duplicating the fire control mechanism and the bolt mechanism, because in addition to this double action system, it has a two-part, basically a linear hammer as a fire control system. So anyway, we have here one of the very first prototypes that has been turned into a cutaway, and so let's take a look. I'll show you how this started and how it has turned into its current evolution, which is the even wackier KH-9 Covert multi-folding PCC. Now, one of the biggest disappointments, I think, of not being able to get tooling for the Sights Spectre is not being able to get tooling for their cool quad stack magazines. But fear not, because they're not the only quad stack magazines out there. And at the time, Brügger was able to get his hands on a small but decent supply of Suomi 50-round quad stack mags, and so that is what the original KH-9 was designed to use. Worth pointing out that at the time the drums were not available, Suomi drums, and so this, kind of like like the original Carl Gustaf submachine guns, will take the 50-round Suomi mags, but it will not take the drums, because you need to do a little bit more cutting, relieving of the receiver up here in order to fit a drum magazine. Anyway, this is built on basic square aluminum extrusion. They use the stock that already existed from the MP9, TP9 project. They use pistol grips from the SIG 550 rifle. This is Switzerland. Those pistol grips were pretty easily available. And then, like I said, this has been cut away. It is missing one of the springs as well as guide rods, so it's not quite complete, but we can show you here a little bit of the basic fundamental action. So there's a very long bolt, and the rear end of the bolt is cut off separately, and this acts as a linear hammer, and if it had all of its springs in it, the linear hammer would actually hold back here until you pull the trigger, and then the hammer drops, goes forward, hits the firing pin, and fires the gun. Then, in addition, you can see there's a little lever right up here that sticks out of the fire control group. That is what allows you to fire it in double action. So you can decock it, drop this linear hammer all the way down, and then the double action trigger is going to pull it back, then release it to fire. Just like that. So in order to justify this to, the actual financial entities in B&T, they decided, you know, what the heck, we'll make a limited run of these and sell them, and, you know, it may take a while to sell, but we'll make back at least most of the money and justify it as a project. So they announced a limited run of 222 of them. Brügger likes numbers that repeat the same digit. So 222 are made available, and they sold out extremely quickly. This turned out to be a very popular idea here in Switzerland. And so with that experience down, they went back to the drawing board and actually came up with a version to sell more of. So this is the second version that was done, and this is still dating from 2015. Now, they had to change some things around here because, well, there weren't really that many Suomi magazines still available, especially not if they're sold a couple hundred of the guns in Switzerland. And so they revised the design to include a magazine well that used APC-9 magazines. So this is the standard magazine that B&T uses in all of its 9mm guns. Now, the second special limited release in Switzerland, you could actually remove the magazine well, and underneath it was this same architecture, which would allow you to use Suomi mags if you had them. But if you didn't have them, you had your APC-9 magazine well that allowed you to actually run the gun. At the same time, of course, there's also a US entity, and there was a lot of interest from the US. So this was submitted to ATF as a pistol, minus the stock, with this magazine well assembly, and was actually approved by ATF as a pistol. And so there was a limited run of these done in the US. In total, I think it was 444 of this pattern. Again, number with the same repeating digit, but more of them because there was clearly enough demand to justify it. All right, since this is our earliest example here that isn't a cutaway that's missing some parts, let me show you how it works. Of course, we have the APC-9 magazine. We have what looks like a safety lever here, but it actually isn't. If I cock the action, I have a single action trigger pull, like so. It's a long reset. It's a little bit of a squishy trigger, but it's a nice light trigger. However, if I want to, for whatever reason, decock the gun, I can push this lever down. That decocks it, which, if you remember from our prototype, is going to take the linear hammer from here and drop it all the way back down. And that means now the trigger pull starts back here, and oh man, it is a really long trigger pull with a nasty trigger slap when it releases. It is honestly unpleasant. And why someone would want this, I really don't know. Like, if you go back and watch my video on the Spectre, my comment on the decocker is, I don't know why anyone would want this. But it certainly is unique, it's unusual, and Brügger very faithfully copied it here on the KH-9. We also have a manual bolt hold open here. So part of the issue is this is very hard to insert a full magazine in when the bolt's closed, especially the early versions with the Suomi mags. So there's a little hole. You'll see this in a moment when I take the bolt out. There's a little recess cut in the bolt there and just a spring-loaded button. So I can pull the bolt back, push the button down. That locks the bolt open. I can then load a magazine and close the bolt. Disassembly is 2 pins, here and here. You can pull off the grip assembly and fire control system, so you can see the double action lever right there. So this is the sear right here. When the hammer, the rear part, like the rear half of the bolt assembly, pushes this down, when I pull the trigger, at the end of travel, it drops. Just like that. That releases the gun to fire. And then, of course, our decocking lever, if the bolt is held, or if the striker, the linear hammer, is held back here, it's being held by this, and when I pull this down, it drops that forward. There we go, this drops down. There's a pin there that locks into the top of the receiver. I pull that back. You've got 2 springs here because one is the linear hammer spring and one is the bolt spring. Pull the bolt handle back, it comes out. And then there is our 2-piece bolt. So these go together like this. This is the other half of your semi-auto disconnector. So when this travels back, it's going to snap back in place, force it to recock. And there's the relief hole I was talking about. The bolt hold open button right here just presses that plunger down into that hole. So this is the one B&T subgun design, or PCC design, that doesn't have a hydraulic buffer in it. Honestly, like there kind of isn't space. The linear hammer here does act as additional weight for the bolt. When the whole thing's cycling back, these two go together. It's almost like the AR buffer that way. But then this also acts as the hammer to fire it. Now, 2 years later, there's still interest in the gun, and Brügger manages to find himself a small supply of Suomi drums. And so they release another limited edition. This time it was 66 of the guns that are, once again, cut for Suomi mags. So they will take the 50-round Suomi drums just fine, but they also have this little additional cutout in the top of, well, the bottom of the receiver, top of the magazine well, that gives them the clearance to fit Suomi 71-round drums. And so that pattern is released on the market as well. And with this one, the barrel length is extended a little bit. I'm not entirely sure why. They adapt the APC-9 collapsing buttstock. So this is also a style of buttstock that was used or offered as a replacement part for the MP5. The attachment socket back here is a little bit different to fit the KH-9's square extrusion profile. And they also made it, the ones that were being made at this time were a little bit taller. They're symmetrical around here. They cut it down just because it kind of looks a little better. This actually will not go all the way forward because the drum interferes with it. But it does extend out full length. And so that was the next limited sort of semi-custom version of the KH-9. All right, we're back to our sort of standard early pattern here. The next iteration that would come would be specifically in the US, and that was for the KH-9 SD, one that has an extended round handguard up here to better fit an integrated suppressor. That was a pattern that was actually not approved by ATF as a pistol, so it had to be manufactured in the US, and that's one that was released specifically in the US. There was then also a KH-45 SD version done, the exact same thing, but in .45 caliber. Skipping forward to 2022, we have the most recent iteration of the KH-9, which is the KH-9 Covert, where they made it all fold. Because if you've got sort of a boutique, fun, you know, not attempting to be specifically practical gun, why not add some other cool bits to it? So the folding pistol grip is made by a company in the US. You may have seen that on like the recent Air Force GAU 5 rifles that kind of made the news at the time. But that folds up, and then more interestingly, the magazine well folds because, well, folding subguns are cool. So we have the regular magazine release there. You then have a release lever in the bottom of the magwell that you pull backwards. So this is not the sort of thing that you're going to accidentally hit thinking it's the mag release, because you have to pull it back this direction. That unlocks the magwell to fold up, and then you can depress the magazine and push, or depress the mag release, push the magazine in so that it is flush with the barrel, and it makes the gun a little bit smaller still. Kind of shades of the Hotchkiss Universal here. Pair that, of course, with the collapsing stock. Note that now the collapsing stock does go all the way in because this doesn't have the cutout. Well, it does have the cutout, but it's not designed to take drum magazines, and presto, KH-9 Covert. And these were released, again, in limited numbers in both the US and in Switzerland. There were a couple additional refinements that were added to the gun by this point as well. The most substantial of them, to my mind, is the addition of a safety function to the decocking lever. So instead of just having a decock and a double action trigger, there's now also an actual safety lever. And I think that's a lot more practical. Maybe takes a little bit of the fun out, but hey, you still do have the decocker. In addition, the top of the charging handle was milled out so that it doesn't get in the way of your iron sight picture or your red dot, depending on the height of the red dot you're using. So a little more complex, a little nicer, nice little iterative improvement to the gun there. These days, the KH-9 is still available both in Europe and in the United States, but in limited orders, so that it's not a standard production item anymore, because it really is sort of a goofy product that appeals to a limited group of enthusiastic shooters. So in the US, like I said, there is also the SD version. There's a 45 SD version, which is kind of cool, and of course the Covert version with all the foldy bits. I think it's a really fun story of legitimately a hobby gun, hey, you know, it'd be cool, let's build this, hold my beer, and it turns into a viable product way beyond anyone's expectations. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Big thanks to B&T for giving me access to all sorts of different variations of this to show to you. Thanks for watching.